Chuck, it's great to see you today.
You, Jason?
Chuck, you're a squadron leader in the Navy SEAL, and you're a part of Navy SEAL Team 6. Today, when you're watching what's happening on the ground in Ukraine, what do you mean for the situation? What is happening in Pokrovsk? A lot of people are talking about it, but what is the reality on the ground?
Well, it was interesting, in Pokrovsk, situation inside the urban area of Pokrovsk is, I would say, highly dynamic at this point. The Russians, maybe about 5 days ago, 6 days ago, they managed to get about 200 of their own special operations forces, reconnaissance troops, into the urban area itself. They announced their presence, in a typical Russian way by massacring civilians at the train station. Uh, the Russian forces were then ordered to go to ground, not to seek contact with Ukrainian forces who were hunting for them. And the Russians did this. It was a bit of a new tactic. And once these guys were reinforced, they started to operate in clumps all over the city. So right now, there are numerous contact points between Russian forces and Ukrainians in the city. But one of the interesting developments here, for the first time in quite a long time, Ukraine has been using air mobile forces, which means Ukraine inserted their own special operations forces by helicopter, including US made Black Hawk helicopters. And these guys are having a very tangible effect on the battlefield.
But Russia is making a very big deal about Pokrovsk. It's saying that if Pokrovsk falls, it will show that Russia is in fact gaining, that Russia is starting to win in this war. What's your interpretation of events?
Well, Pokrovsk is not the keystone in the defense of eastern Ukraine. And parallels can be drawn with the other Russian victory, again in air quotes, in Bakhmut. After burning up as many as 150,000 dead to take the town of Bakhmut, uh, Russia failed to take the high ground in the vicinity of Chasiv Yar. So the entire military effort in Bakhmut was simply negated by the fact that Russia could not and still has not advanced uh, to the west of Bakhmut. We see the same situation here in Pokrovsk, and in fact, the battle is unfolding much as Bakhmut did. You hear a lot of Russian propaganda and some of the more uninformed military analysis of Pokrovsk saying, look, Pokrovsk is a vital logistics hub. Well, it was 10 months ago. When Ukraine was fighting in Avdiivka, Pokrovsk was a very important city. Now, it's no longer a hub, it's a terminal point. It no longer is a viable base for military operation. It is a blasted hulk. So I think it's going to be up to Ukraine, who still, as in Bakhmut, they Ukraine dictates the pace of battle and the place of battle. And it's gonna be up to Ukraine to determine how many resources and how much manpower they're gonna use in this fight. Otherwise, like Bakhmut, it is an attritional battle, and Ukraine will engage in this as long as it's killing more Russians than it is losing defenders.
Well, it certainly seems that Ukraine is carrying out a lot of attacks on Russia and on the Russian troops inside of Ukraine. And it seems that they're going after a lot of things, the oil refineries, the air defense, as well as factories in Russia. What have you been noticing on that front?
Well, interesting statistics over the last couple of weeks have come up with apparently Russia so far in this 3.5 years of conflict, Russia has lost about 25% of its total air defense platforms. Now, some of those are very sophisticated platforms or they're higher end S-400s, S-300s, but they've even lost S-200 systems. But a quarter of your systems is a lot. Some of those platforms have come off worse than others. One of Russia's top drawer systems is, of course, the S-1 Pantsir, and the interesting number on that is they've lost almost half, somewhere between 40 and 48% of the Pantsir systems. And that is also based we saw the Pantsir make its combat debut in Syria, where 4 or 5 years ago, a very interesting video told me that the Pantsir wasn't gonna make it, and that was when a very slow Israeli drone traveling at about 40 miles of an hour closed in on a Pantsir system, and on the video, I watched all the doors open and all the crewmen jump out just before this thing hit. It was designed to engage high-speed jet penetrators, right? It wasn't designed to track something at 100 feet going 60 miles an hour. So the Pansirs have taken a beating.
That's amazing. So going ahead, how is Russia going to be able to defend itself? It looks like in Moscow, as well as in Valdai, where Vladimir Putin often is, they've sent a lot of air defense there. In fact, so much air defense that at the front, it's lacking. How do you see, though? Do the Russian soldiers look like they're taking more of a beating now than they were before, or are they getting better organized than they were before?
Well, yeah, Putin has just announced that conscription will now go all year rather than a spring or fall class. Russia is making these noises now that reservists are going to be sent to defend important sites. I don't know whether that's going to be in Ukraine. The implication is it's going to be in Russia. But what Ukraine has been able to do by hitting important military manufacturing sites, logistical sites, and especially oil refineries, it impinges on the lowering numbers of totally available Russian air defense. So, to our Russian listening guests, if you want gasoline, you're going to have to divert resources from the front in Ukraine to protect your far-flung oil refineries, some of which are 1,000 or 1,500 miles away from the front. And the good news is Ukraine is hitting those refineries at ranges above 1,000 miles. It's pretty impressive for a nation that doesn't have strategic aviation.
It's very impressive. So, looking at this, what are the Russians doing? What do you think the strategy is now that they think that soon they'll take Pokrovsk, but where will they go from here? What else can they try to do?
Well, here's the interesting thing. Much like Bakhmut, let's say Pokrovsk were to fall this afternoon. You pull back from the map and you look, the next adjacent city is almost 60 miles away. And also looking at the topographic map, and I encourage people to look at that, this is flat, rolling agricultural land, and the only trees or bushes are windbreaks between massive wheat fields. And this sounds is going to sound counterintuitive, but what used to be maneuver country, tank country, the open rolling fields that armor commanders love to move and envision big arrows going through, those are killing fields now in this first 21st century war. You are out in the open in a vehicle or even on foot, you are going to be killed by an FPV drone. And Ukraine is putting thousands of drones into the air every single day. And if anyone doubts that number, just consider that more than 1,000 Russian troops perish every day, and a very, very significant number of them are not killed by rifle fire or indirect fire weapons or artillery. They are killed by first person drones. That is frightening.
So, going ahead, considering that drones now play this massive role, do you think this is going to change how things like tanks are used in future wars? How does this change the entire dynamism of warfare?
No, I am not an armor officer. I was a naval officer, uh, but I don't think the tank is dead. I think the drones have changed the complexion of modern warfare, and there is absolutely no doubt about that. But the the thing that is going to be most important in my estimation, and look, this is my hypothesis, if you want to conduct large-scale ground maneuver warfare in the future, and that will still be done, you're going to have to dominate the electromagnetic spectrum. You are gonna have to make sure that your opponent's drones can't fly, can't find their targets, can't detonate, can't even get there. Fiber optics are a problem now. I don't know how long fiber optics are going to have an edge, and I note also there was a Ukrainian soldier in the field last week who was being stalked by a fiber optic drone, and he rolled over to the fiber optic cable that was laying on the ground, and he bit it with his teeth, and that crashed the drone. I'm just saying that War is always a game of technology, countermeasure, measure, countermeasure. Look, it has definitely changed the complexion of the war. And 3 years ago, Jason, if I told you that most people on a battlefield were going to be killed by flying robots, you would have thought it was a Terminator movie, but that's what we're looking.
It's pretty incredible. In fact, I was just in Donetsk Oblast visiting the front there, and according to the soldiers with whom we spoke, in fact, drones are making a decisive difference in this war. And it's something that is giving Ukraine a massive advantage. Ukraine has new technology, has a lot of people who are very entrepreneurial, has a lot of people that are trying to use the best of the sciences to make the best drones to defend Ukraine and to eject the Russian invaders. But the Russians, they have a state bureaucracy. They have the hand-me-downs from Iran and the ones that are now produced in Russia, but using the designs from Iran. They don't have this same sort of entrepreneurial spirit nor factories set up by people like volunteers. They're trying to create new means of creating drones, and that's giving Ukraine a huge advantage. But what other things, what other technologies have you seen in the recent past or during this war that you think are changing the way that war is fought?
You know, I think these small, interceptor drones that are increasingly able to prosecute incoming targets with minimal human intervention. So there are, for example, the Odin drone, you're looking at something that's the size of 2 coffee cans stacked on each other. You let it go in the air, uh, you get it in the vicinity of the target, and it will prosecute the target on its own. And we hear a lot about Russian drone developments, but we don't hear a lot about Russian drone interceptors. They still seem to be crashing one drone into another drone. And again, you look back and, it's Russia that needs to do something, right? It needs to conquer Ukraine. Seems like a small thing, but that means in a war or a street fight, the enemy keeps coming to you, right? So he is compelled to move forward. Uh, I see the triumph of of Ukraine in a lot of situations in every point of contact. When a Russian unit meets a Ukrainian unit, Russians suffer between 40 and 80% casualty. That's because Russia's battlefield efficiency, not surprisingly, is minimal. Because you get sworn in Moscow, you get on a bus, 5 days later, you're in Ukraine, and you're in an assault. And I just ask our listeners, imagine if I came into your house today, grabbed you by the shirt front, and 5 days later, I put you in Ukraine. How would you do? You wouldn't do well. That's why the Russians attack in broad daylight. That's why one vehicle follows another, because they can't navigate individually. Uh, that's never gonna change, Jason, not in this war. It could change generationally if Moscow gets out of this war and starts retraining an army, but they're not gonna win in Ukraine. Look, you and I have spent time there. You see the motivation of the Ukrainian troops. Look, it's a hard fight, but they are capable of much more complex military evolution than their enemy, and that makes the difference.
So, Chuck, let me ask you just one last question. How do you think morale is doing right now in the Russian military?
Well, we know that Russian, soldiers routinely film themselves gathered together to complain about something. Now that's great in a democracy, but an army isn't a democracy. In a democracy, in a dictator's army, look, that is what's called a mutinous assembly, right? You don't get to do that in the military. We know that a colonel marshaled his troops in Kherson to give them a pep talk, and they tore him limb from limb. They beat him to death. Okay. Their officers get fragged. Uh, Morale is abysmal. Russian soldiers themselves talk about cannibalism. They talk about being deployed on the zero line and never brought back. They aren't fed. They don't get water. All I can tell you is all of their miseries are about to redouble because winter's coming. And it's November in Ukraine, and everybody knows, December in Ukraine is going to be a lot colder. Russia's shattered logistics. Look, motorcycles and wheelbarrows and donkeys cannot supply a modern army, especially an army that is constantly on offense, right? Constantly uh, pushing forward at staggering cost, Jason. Those inefficiencies, that corruption, It's true to say, and people will say this, especially Vodniks, Russia's never going to run out of men. Yes, absolutely. But they're running out of army right now. Those men are not in cohesive units anymore. They are mailing it in terms of their combat performance, and it shows.
Well, it looks like things are going to get worse and worse for the Russians, so we have something to look forward to. Chuck, great talking with you.
Thanks, Jason.